I know you're home in France after weeks in Afghanistan. What was the moment like when you were able to get home and see your family?
I mean, at this stage, honestly, I'm so exhausted and so kind of overwhelmed by everything I've witnessed over the last week or so that it was absolutely a wonderful feeling to hug my little boys and my husband and my parents. But there's also just a sense of like, it's just like collapse, basically. It's like finally
Right.
I can just let go and collapse.
And hopefully get some good sleep for the first time in many days. Let's talk about the experience of leaving Kabul, leaving Afghanistan, and then we'll go back to what the past week has been like. We have some video we can show of getting on board the plane in Afghanistan, leaving the country. Can you describe for us what this journey was like?
Well, essentially, there's hundreds of you. It's the middle of the night. It's incredibly loud. You walk along the airfield. There's hot air being blown at you from all the different engines on the runway. And you are crammed onto this enormous C-17. Everybody has to stand and face forwards because you're like sardines packed in there. And then at a certain point, everybody sits down in unison so that there's room for everyone to sit, but you're not really able to. You can sort of just about sit cross-legged, and you're sort of looking around, and people are just so scared, Brian. People are asking, where are we going? What happens next? I can't, my phone doesn't work. Who do I contact? How will I find the rest of my family? And because I'm a Westerner, and with my crew, Brent Swales, William Bonnet, so everybody's asking us all these questions, like we might know the answers in terms of what comes next and how they'll get out and where they'll go and what will happen to the people that have been left behind. And then the engines start, and you're off, and everyone's sitting sort of huddled together, people holding on to each other, people collapse with exhaustion. And it's just this very, very strange sense of relief, but also sadness and guilt. Guilt, like, why do we get to leave? Why are we so lucky and fortunate? And tens of thousands of others are still pressing to try to get into that airport to try to get out safely.
And you landed in Doha in Qatar, and I know there was a delay. You had to get a COVID test. I have to admit, I laughed a little bit when I heard that. You're coming out of this dangerous country, and now you have to get a COVID test. But so, what was that processing situation like in Doha?
So, first of all, I think it has to be said that what the Qataris are doing and what they have been trying to do is incredible. They are completely inundated and overwhelmed. They were originally asked to take several hundred. They got 600 in the first plane load, thousands since. They've been trying to process them. They've been trying to get them housing. They've been trying to feed them, to make sure they have medical attention, the medicines that they need. So many people with diabetes and heart issues are arriving without their proper medication. And so they've really been struggling. On top of that, they're launching their own evacuation efforts, a girls' school, boarding school they managed to evacuate. But because they are so inundated, there are cases where these C-17s will sit on the runway for 6 hours um, as the process unfolds of trying to put all these people through the system. And obviously, that's pretty much a nightmare because it's over 100 degrees, very high levels of humidity.
Yeah.
From there, we got off the plane. We had to do a COVID test, and as you said, it was that sort of reminder of like, oh wow, COVID. We had all sort of forgotten about COVID for a few weeks because when you're in this heartache and this chaos in Afghanistan, it just the normalcy of the rest of the world feels a million miles away.
Yeah.
And from there, the Qataris were incredibly gracious. They really expedited those tests for us so that we were able to get on planes and go to our respective homes around the world. But for all of the
Yeah.
Afghans who are on those planes with us, some of them have gone to the US, including our translator, Shafi, which honestly, I can't even tell you what a relief that was to be able to be sure that he got on that plane and is starting a new life. And it's petrifying for him. And he was on the edge of tears, and we're trying to comfort him and tell him it's going to be okay. But
Wow.
thank God he got on the plane. So that's really good news.
Thank God. What about a week ago? A week ago Sunday, you and I were talking here this hour when the Taliban was confirmed to be in the capital, when the capital fell to the Taliban. Was that the scariest day? Was there a day that was the worst or the most perilous for you and your team?
I think, whenever you're covering conflict, the thing that generates the most fear, other than someone literally sort of putting a gun in your face, is uncertainty, like real profound uncertainty. And so we woke up that Monday morning having no idea what to expect. And on a sort of everyday logistical level, that was challenging because obviously our local staff did not come to the house that day because they were incredibly fearful, which meant we didn't really have any food.
Oh,
So for a couple of days, we were just sort of eating eggs and nuts. So there's the kind of logistical considerations, and then there are the very real security considerations. And there was a lot of talk in those first days about organizing an evacuation. And I sat with Brent Swales and William Bonnet and Najibullah Qureshi, who we're all part of the same team, and we said, listen, do we want to evacuate? We don't know what's going to happen. Is there going to be house-to-house fighting? Is there going to be, are there going to be car bombs? Is there going to be resistance? Are the Taliban going to come and immediately start purging all Westerners? You just have no idea what to expect. But we sat and we had this conversation, and I think we just all felt that we had to see this through. We had to stay on this story. We had enough experience dealing with the Taliban over the past weeks and for me, years, that we felt confident that that it was in their interest to allow us to do our jobs and with some degree of safety. So we all made the decision to stay, and I'm very glad that we did.
so the decision to stay, and then how did you decide when to leave? Was it as conditions worsened on the street? We all remember when, when Brent was confronted and almost pistol whipped.
Yeah. Actually, honestly, the decision to leave, I think, was mostly a product of the fact that we were all absolutely exhausted. We'd been in Afghanistan for 3 weeks, working 19-hour days.
Yeah.
It's certainly been one of the most intense stories I've ever covered. And I think for all of us, we thought, okay, if we're going to keep doing justice to this story, we need probably a fresh set of eyes on it. And, my colleagues, our colleagues, Sam Kiley and Mick Creever, are now on the ground at the Kabul airport doing incredible work. And that's the beauty of working somewhere like CNN, is that, it's a big team, and it's, we all got to take turns to make sure we give it our full energy and all of the heart that we can muster.
Well, to that point, I was rereading your book On All Fronts earlier this week, because I have it at home, and I was flipping through the pages reading about your experiences in Afghanistan in the past. You write about your first trip with the Taliban. I think it was 2 years ago, right? And you write about getting access. And I wondered if those trips in the past helped you this time around, right? That you were able to embed at different moments with Taliban officials or with fighters.
I think it was a big help, Ryan, because for a lot of Western journalists, the Taliban is just this absolutely petrifying, enigmatic, dark, militant force. And for myself and Najibullah Qureshi, having spent some time with them before and interviewed with them and embedded with them in their own territory, you have a better understanding of how to deal with them, how to engage with them, how to behave in a way that they might be more receptive to. And I think it definitely did something to mitigate the fear factor a little bit, because while I am not trying to downplay the danger that the Taliban can and does pose to so many right now, I also understood that they wanted to be seen as pragmatic. They wanted to be seen as politically mature. They wanted to be seen as protecting the rights of journalists and other parties involved. So I think that it gave me just a little more confidence and courage when it came to marching up to them on the streets and confronting them about things like women's rights.
Right, right. And, about that, you mentioned getting, we were talking about getting home and you being with your kids today. I have 2 young kids. You have 2 young kids. We've talked about this in the past. I wonder how do you square it? How do you square it in your mind? Because I'm sure there's a part of you that still feels like you're in Kabul right now, and thinking about the children that you saw, the parents you saw desperately trying to hand off their children to military officials. How do you reckon with that?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think people always, they're like, what's the hardest part of this job? It must be that you get scared. And it's not. Honestly, the hardest part of the job is the guilt, because I get to walk away. When I get too tired, I get to walk away at the end of the day, get on a plane, land, hug my kids, be with my family, sleep, eat. And why is that? Just because I have a little blue passport and other people don't. And I don't think that gets any easier. And I don't think you ever get used to that. And especially as a mother this time, that day at the airport, 14 hours in the scorching sun, and watching these women try to find a private place to breastfeed, using these little bits of cardboard to fan their babies, hearing and seeing these images of people throwing their babies across the razor wire. I mean, that if that doesn't rip your heart out and haunt you and make you question everything in this life, then I don't know. Then I don't know what will. But the bottom line is, in order to keep doing this job, you have to live with it and accept it and embrace it
Mm.
and thank God for it. But you can't let it get you down to the point where you can't keep doing the work.